Hello guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be looking at the Kaspa network, and today we're actually going to be having a discussion about if ASICs are actually good for security on the network or if they're bad for security on the network. So we've seen an increase of the Kaspa hash rate for the last 3 months, as you can see here, October, September, August, and then into July it was starting to increase. Now this, around this region, from 1 petahash up to around 1.5 was basically where everyone was getting the KS0s, and then from there we've got the KS2s, KS3s, and the Bitmain KS3s, so Ice River plus Bitmain. Now there are various discussions out there of if this is good for the network overall. I know that we had a couple discussions before they were released, but now we're seeing real world information on the actual network hash rate, and then we can kind of contrast this to how much power the network is using. And this is the main metric that we're going to be focusing on today, which is how much power the network uses in terms of how much power draw comes from the GPU, how much that costs, how much those GPU costs, plus the same on the ASIC side. So we're going to be rounding a bunch of figures out, and we're going to be going through a very rounded out rough estimate, but the figures will show it to be very different. So the main thing that we're going for here is we're going to compare how much hash rate is on the network before. So we're going to take this first line here. So I believe it was around here where the KS0s actually started jumping on the network. So we're going to go from around 1 petahash. This is what I've got in the calculations. And then we're going to compare that to the 49 petahash. And we're going to assume that all the petahash, or at least the hash rate, is either on the GPU or it's all on ASICs. Now I know that this is not a figure that's true because we can still see that there are some GPU miners on Kaspa Coin using the Hive OS statistics. And this means that there's still GPUs on the network, but not as much as there used to be. They've moved over to more profitable coins right now, like Dynex, Ravencoin, Nexa, and Radiant. So we're going to get into all these figures, and let's go over to the Google documents. So the first thing that we're going to calculate is the petahash to megahash ratio. So 1 petahash equals 1 trillion megahash. 1 trillion megahash is divided by 481.2 megahash. Now, where have I got this figure from? It is from the overclocks for Kaspa Coin for the 3070 Ti. Now, the reason that I've used the 3070 Ti is because it's mainly one of the main models which people will be mining on. As you can see down there, the 3070 Ti or the 3070, and this is just a very rough estimate. I know that there'll be varying different GPUs, but this is one of the benchmark ones which aren't as expensive as the newer ones and aren't too cheap than the older ones, plus they give a very efficient hash rate. So we're going based off the 3070 Ti. So the 3070 Ti does 481.2, if we can see there. So this is going to give us how many 3070 Ti's, or technically GPUs, are kind of on the network at the 1 petahash range before the ASICs came along onto the network. Now I know this is not going to account for FPGAs as well, so we're just going to say that the FPGAs didn't make up a large amount of it, and we are really rounding out here and doing really rough estimates, but this is what we're going to assume. So this means that there was around 2 million 3070s or GPUs on the network at the time before ASICs took over. Now, the figures for the GPUs would be this 2 million figure times by the power draw, which on a 3070 Ti is 61 watts with overclocks. Now this gives us around 126 million watts and 126,000 kilowatts per hour. So now that is a lot of power draw from the network. Now we need to actually contrast this with an ASIC network, which we have right now. As I said, I know that there's still some on the actual Kaspa network. However, for the most part, it's mainly ASICs on this hash rate that we've seen on this spike up here. Also, we're not accounting for the overclocking that happened for the KS0 or any of the other Ice River ASICs. We're just going based off the previous figure. So that would be 8 terahash for the Ice River KS3. As we can see here, we have a terahash of 8 terahash with 3200 watts as the draw. So when we go back to the document, we can see here there's 49 petahash on the network as of right now. This was actually calculated a little bit earlier than this. So we did have 49 petahash on the actual network, which works out to 49,000 terahash. Then we take this terahash, divide it by 8, because that's how much the Ice River gives, and that gives us around 6,100 units of the KS3. Now I know that this is going to be divided slightly by stuff like the KS0, KS2s, plus the KS3s from Bitmain are slightly higher, but we are using estimates as I said, so it's not going to be a figure that's going to be way off, but it's also not going to be a figure that is really close in terms of the power draw. So we know that we're kind of around 6 times more power draw. If we look here, we have 6,100 units times by 3,200 watts equals 19 million watts and equals 19,600 kilowatts per hour. This means that when we take these two figures, the Kaspa network before the ASICs came online was using 6.45 times more power on the network. What does this mean? This in theory means that you are spending more on power on the network, as in all the miners combined were spending more. I know that we are going off of rough estimates, but as you can see, there's substantially more power draw. So that means that people were actually buying more power to secure the network. Now, when it comes to security, power draw is a factor because that's how much it costs to actually do an attack on the network. I know that there are other costs that are assumed as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. However, if you take the number of GPUs divided by the number of ASICs that would be on the network, it gives you a ratio of 338 to 1. So there's 338 3070 Ti's make up one KS3. Now, as I said, rough estimation. However, when we look at it, the GPU price for all of these 3070 Ti's to secure the network would be 620 million if we assumed an MSRP of around 300, because you can get them lower or you could get them slightly higher depending on where you're buying your 3070 Ti's from. And then on the flip side, from the KS3s, we assumed a value of 18,000. I know that this is not the actual accurate value because they were sold at higher values, but still it's not going to get anywhere near 623 million. We took the price at the time now plus 500, but I believe they were going for around 30,000 to around 40,000 depending on where you're getting them from. So this figure could be in theory doubled, so it would be 200 million, but that's still not anywhere near the 620 million that we have for the GPU side. So we have the cost of the GPUs is going to be more to secure the network, plus the cost of the power is going to be more to secure the network, which in theory should equate that the network is more secure. Now, that's not necessarily true because you can still nice hashable a certain amount of the hash rate, but the only thing that doesn't secure the network when we're talking about Kaspa or when we're talking about any other coin is the transition from GPUs to ASICs. Now, this transition is probably one of the most vulnerable for attacks because you have a company like Ice River, which produced the KS0s and KS1s and 2s, and they came out way before the Bitmain ones. Now, if Ice River wanted to actually attack the Kaspa network, they could basically plug in all of their ASICs and then they could perform an attack on the network because they'd hold a large amount of the hash rate on the network. This is one of the main things that was a concern, and obviously Ice River didn't do that because there's more money to be made in selling the miner, but it was a concern for a little bit because they were a shady company and we didn't really know at the time like if they were going to be selling them or not, or if it was even real. So we didn't know if they could perform an attack on the network. Now, for people like Red Panda Mining who got it early, that could be the same problem. So it's mainly about securing the network with a ton of GPUs first, which Kaspa did. However, if you're a smaller coin, then it kind of gets into a bit of a troubled territory if you release an ASIC with a little amount of GPU hash rate on the network. Just because a certain amount of those ASICs would basically mean that you could perform a 51% attack on the network. For the most part though, Kaspa still has GPUs on the network, which obviously isn't going to make up this 600 million figure, but it still has GPUs on the network, plus the ASICs on the network. I don't think that it's even remotely not secure right now, depending on how much hash rate any one mining company holds. I know there's a lot of people out there that've got 2, 3, 4 ASICs, which is nowhere near the amount to actually perform a 51% attack. And I don't think they're spread out enough to perform that attack. But as I said, the transition from GPU to ASIC is the most vulnerable a network can be. Now, in an ideal world, you'd want one GPU to equal one person. However, there's a lot of people out there that have multiple GPUs, even farms of hundreds or thousands of GPUs. So this is where it gets into the territory of, are those GPUs on NiceHash? If so, people could rent them out to actually perform an attack on a smaller network, not like Kaspa. But this is one of the problems that we as GPU miners plus ASIC miners face when you want a network to succeed. You don't want to have anyone controlling over 51% of the hash rate. As we see with pools for certain coins, they have over 51%, which technically means if they get hacked into, somebody could reroute all of the miners at that point onto a different pool and then perform an attack on the network. But for the most part, Kaspa's okay, and a lot of coins are still okay, but the transitionary phase is still the vulnerable phase for any GPU mineable coin out there. And you could even make an argument that it would be the same for CPUs over to GPUs. And we've had a lot of people out there, from Ironfish as well, saying that they didn't want to have FPGAs on the network because eventually it will lead to ASICs on the network. So they wanted to actually revert it. And then we have this new GPU algorithm for Ironfish, which is going to revert it back to FPGA/ASIC resistance. So overall, it doesn't really matter unless it's a very small coin. However, it is good to know the figures on this, and it's good to educate people on why it's important. There is still GPUs on the Kaspa network, there's still FPGAs, and there's still ASICs on the network which are securing it. It's just the amount of power draw from an ASIC, in theory, is less than 6.4 times that of the 3070 Ti's, which would be on the network at the time. So in a theoretical world, it would cost more to perform an attack if there was strictly GPUs on the network rather than strictly ASICs on the network, depending on how much money you had to burn through to actually attack a coin. So that's it for the video, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this. If I got anything wrong, please leave a comment below and just have a little discussion in the comments what you think about this. I'll try to respond to all of the comments. If you have any criticism, please like the video and subscribe for more content like this.